Hello and welcome to Your Property Podcast. My name is Michelle Cairns, your host, and today is the 19th of November 2021. And with us, we have got Paul Lanfear with us. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's absolutely our pleasure as well, and keen to get you on because I'll just do a little intro first so people got an idea a bit about your background. Sure. So you obtained a first-class law degree and started professional life as a barrister, and then later qualified as a solicitor, practising commercial, banking and finance litigation for 10 years, both in London and Leeds for two of the world's leading law firms. And all this before leading a demanding qualification programme for prospective barristers, starting a family, becoming an award-winning property entrepreneur, investor, developer, and multiple business owner. So a bit of background about yourself there. Always a busy guy, but I think you have. Your journey is quite unique because of how you've scaled up, you've worked on different elements of the property businesses, and then we're all with the intention of the lifestyle design, which I think is not too common. I think a lot of people, that they are really focused on the deals, and it's the next deal, and that's fine if you love the deal. But what I really appreciate about you and your journey is actually the focus has always been around the lifestyle design and, the big why about why we're doing this, and actually taking into account not just property, but the macroeconomics, if you like, of everything else that is feeding into property. And, your portfolio is diversified, not just within property, but within other industries as well. So without further ado, let's start with kind of where do you see this year has gone on? I know that's like a very big global question, but what are your thoughts on this year? And then we'll look at kind of moving forward into 2022 as well.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very happy to do that. And I really appreciate the very kind introduction. I'm sure my mum enjoys that introduction as well. I suppose what's the reality of that is that I genuinely wanted to be the guitarist in something like Metallica, but that didn't quite work out, so I had to have a plan B. Plan B was law, but I've got no complaints. It served me really, really well. In terms of the context of the discussion today, I mean, it's probably helpful, as you rightly did at the outset, to date stamp it. So here we are, kind of getting towards the latter part of 2021, and what a time to be alive. I mean, you can genuinely say, I think, that this is one of the most exciting, interesting, fascinating times in all of living history to be alive. And I think we're very blessed, that we're getting to see this unfold. I appreciate not all of it has gone to plan for all of us, but what a time to be alive. So I think that's the context. So I think, in our discussions, I think we've talked about, what's 2021 all been about, because I think that'll inform us as to, if we gaze into our crystal balls, what 2022 and beyond might be. But so 2021, I don't really like this as an expression, but I suppose it's a reality. There's been winners and losers, haven't there? And if we confine this for a moment to the property space, we have very sadly seen, high-profile developers fail. Take their investors with them. Very tragic. And there's a human consequence to all of that. We can't deny or diminish that. We've seen really high-profile businesses not go the distance. Businesses which we've got a lot of admiration for, just was so damaged by COVID that they couldn't go the full distance. And we've seen really solid businesses have to be sold at eye-watering discounts after people have put in a lot of life and energy into them. So I suppose that would that's the bad news, isn't it? That's the bad news. And then we have to kind of, I suppose, drill out to the context that we're in. And there was, in previous years, when we were kind of coming out of COVID, one of the big conversations in the kind of the macroeconomic field and amongst investors has always been, is this an inflationary environment? Is this deflationary environment? And we'll all, but you don't need to go too far into YouTube to find, people who have been foretelling the end of the world since the beginning of time. And, fair play to them. Like, there's some great people in there, like Jim Rogers, one of the greatest investors of all times, one of my great heroes, written, fantastic, interesting books. He's forever telling the end of the world. But, so far, the end of the world has not yet arrived. What we know as a matter of fact is one day he'll be right. And, congratulations to him. But you don't have to wander too far to see a lot of doom and gloom. You don't have to wander too far to hear a narrative about deflation, everything going to zero. So far, that's not happened, has it?
Well, like Robert Kiyosaki is another one. He's been talking about this for for many years, and and how to kind of protect yourself through property as being one of the ways to to buffer the changes or crashes that may or may not come.
I guess if we all had like a grand for every time Kiyosaki said the market was going to crash, I think. Anyway, let's not go into that too much. But so there's a lot of talk in there about a deflationary environment, and elements of that are definitely going to be true. We can kind of wander into that space in a moment. But what are we seeing right now? We are undoubtedly in an inflationary environment. Even the government statistics prove that. They are in black and white for us all to see, that we're seeing inflation going up rapidly. And you don't need to delve too far into the subject matter until you come to a point of view where you will hear analysts really pick apart not only the number, but also the methodology used to reach that inflation number. And they would say, if you realistically want the real number, you probably need to double it or treble it. We'll leave that for them to discuss. But it does look like that the inflation deflation debate has been resolved in the short term, which is this is definitely an inflationary environment. And inflation, I'm kind of lumping into the good category in our conversation, but full disclosure, it's not good for everybody, is it? So, if you haven't had a year-on-year pay rise in excess of whatever the inflation number is, you are becoming poorer and poorer every month. If you don't happen to own assets which at least move with inflation, then your wealth is being eroded. And this isn't this isn't just an issue for the hardcore capitalists listening to the podcast. It's a real issue for everybody. Because what is the reality? The reality is, and this is certainly true in the property space, lots of people for property are, former teachers, former doctors, former, they have done jobs and they have contributed to the well-being of the economy, and they have been utterly productive. But what they've chosen to do is to engage in deferred gratification, which is no easy thing in this world. And they have stored the energy of their labor into assets and not gone on all of those holidays, maybe not bought that car they wanted, maybe worked longer and harder than ideally they would have wished, but they've stored their labor in assets. They have deferred their gratification. And they've done that because they are a highly responsible individual who wishes not to be a burden on the rest of the tribe, but wants to contribute to the work of the tribe and to look after themselves now and in the future, and maybe also look after the generations that follow, which is a highly applaudable thing, I would personally say, but maybe that gives you my worldview. So they're putting their hard-earned labour into inflation beating assets, and that's got to be a good thing, isn't it? But it's not good. Inflation isn't good for anyone. But we are here. We have inflation, and we're going to have to deal with it. And it's no longer like a niche topic for middle-aged men with tweed jackets and those leather arm patches that you used to get on the elbow. Like Jack Dorsey of Twitter tweeted not that long ago, hyperinflation, basically hyperinflation is on the way. if Jack Dorsey is now tweeting it, maybe it's something we need to pay attention to. So that's, yeah.
What we talk about hyperinflation, inflation, and the numbers, and as you say, it's easy to find on BBC the headlines of what percentage it is today. But for people like the people you mentioned who are, let's say, they're getting started in property, they've got a few, or even they're not, they've got 100k, 50k sitting in the bank, they're not sure what to do with it. Every time they go to the bank statement or they go online, they see that 100k sitting there, right?
Yeah.
So how do we how do we kind of explain to people about the impact, and when are people going to actually feel it? And I suppose the answer is, what does it mean? What should people do with this information?
Definitely. That's a great question. And I always think that the best thing to do is to take it as quickly as possible into the real world, to take everything into the real world, and to make it immediate. So in different training environments, you would have heard about school. If you want to feel better about something, you might want to disassociate from it. But if you want to focus on it, you associate, you bring it as close up to you as possible. And I suppose just a footnote before everybody starts kind of running out the door to buy canned goods, I'm not suggesting in any way we're in a hyperinflationary environment. I mean, that's like 50% inflation per month, compounding in a vertical straight line. So let's not rush out, stock up on toilet roll or canned goods. That's not what I'm talking about. Just talking about the fact that we are in an environment where we are seeing, in particular, asset prices, but also consumer prices, regardless of whatever data the government might give you. And so you can do a few different little exercises. So an obvious one is if you do a regular journey, is to fill up with petrol before you set off, and then as soon as you come back, fill up with petrol and do exactly the same thing every time you do that journey. So I, as Michelle will know, I'm in the throes of what appears to be like a 10-year midlife crisis. And my expression of this midlife crisis is to take up surfing. So I go surfing every week without fail. And it's to much bafflement of my property peers who, say to me, look, how come you take like a day off in the middle of the week? Are you, what are you doing? Doesn't that ruin your week? And I'm like, no, this is the point, guys. The point is of all of this, that you don't work a 5-day week, and that you put yourself first, and you reward yourself for your activities, and you live the life you want to live. Anyway, rant over. So I fill up with petrol every time I go, where I live in Yorkshire to where I go in the coastline. And I promise you, if you do that for a year, you get a lot of information, and you really see in real time inflation in action. And energy prices are a crucial element of inflation, but there's a good argument to say that they are the scapegoat. So it's easy to point towards energy prices and say it's all because of energy prices, when it's to do with much wider issues. Another thing that you can do to get your head around it is to track certain things. So as part of my kind of inner circle mentoring group, it was only intended to be a bit of fun in a way. We track on an ongoing basis certain things. So we happen to track the price of gold, the price of crypto, so particularly Bitcoin, a particular Rolex, the price of a particular Rolex watch, because it's a collectible. And I've added to that fairly recently a camper van, just because it is only intended to be a bit of fun, isn't it? And I happen to like camper vans. And it is, astonishing to see what's happened to the prices of those things. Now, there's been some disappointments in there. So some of the gold bugs, I think their life is one of utter frustration, because all of the data, all of the common sense says that gold should be going to the moon, and it's not. It had its heyday a previous summer. Goldman Sachs, I think, helped it got there. But I think when they'd made their money, they pressed the sell button and pretty much wiped out the gold market, ever since. And hopefully it's finding its feet one day. But let's hazard a guess. I mean, Michelle, what do you think the return on the Bitcoin has been since we set up the exercise as a bit of fun?
Well, Well, it's gone up and then gone like shot right down again, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know where it's up to at the moment, but
If you had to guess, like, and do it in terms of how many times is it flipped? So 3x, 6x, or 9x?
thank you for the options there. I'm going to go for 6x.
Well, you're not miles off the mark, but it's actually about 9x. At the time of this, it's about 9x, just as a bit of an observation. Gold's gone up, gold's gone up, it's gone down, but it's heading in the right direction. And the collectible watch has gone up in value by a factor of about 50%, so 50% return on investment. And what's the odd one in the mix? The camper van. And what's odd about the camper van is that the camper van, which now has, let's say, 80,000 miles on it, now you could sell in the open market for more than it was purchased, brand new, delivered purpose built from Germany. None of that makes sense. On one view, none of that can possibly make sense. But this is the world that we live in. So if someone tells you there isn't inflation, I think, or if they say it's transitory, which is the terminology that's coming out of the States, you probably know it's not true.
Okay, right. So then what do people do then? So it's these kind of macro trends and what's going on in the world are filtering down through us, and we're kind of sensing that the money's not going as far as it was a couple of years ago. What does that mean then? What should we do about it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's obviously useful to track in your own personal way. So, I mean, to have, to not be willfully blind and to see what's going on in your bank account, to have some idea of, what your shopping budget is looking like, because that's all good information. And life might be so comfortable for you that you don't, those issues, aren't irrelevant to you, but they'll certainly be relevant to the people around you in the community, and indeed if you're a property owner, your tenants, for example. So the first thing is you've got to manage the process of at least standing still. So standing still is that you give yourself a above inflation, or at least inflation, pay rise every year. So that's the minimum available activity that you've got to do. And if you're your own boss, then you've got the worst boss in the world. I think that's pretty well understood in entrepreneurial circles, isn't it? But you've got to build that in for your future planning. So when you're looking far ahead, you're looking at the next 12 months. We do need to be factoring in how can we ideally manage or reduce our lifestyle costs, and that might be also beneficial for the planet. Who knows? And then how can we make sure that we're increasing what we pay ourselves from our businesses at an above inflation rate, so our standard of living is compounding in an upward direction as well. And we obviously talk about that in monetary terms. I suppose, as you've alluded to, I would also take a more holistic approach and say, are you compounding as a lifestyle choice in a more positive direction? How that translates into the real world. So given the title of this podcast and how we've met each other through the industry, you would assume that many of the listeners own property or aspire to own property. So, there is no doubt that property, it's one of the absolute core assets that has always beaten inflation, or nearly always beaten inflation. There are some problems, and I'm going to be really upfront with what the problems are going to be. Let's not lie about that. Let's be really totally upfront of that. But if you read about any of the great families who have survived, that, and they've created generational wealth, and they have survived some of the worst human conflict on the planet, it largely distills down to real estate, gold, diamonds, because they're so easily transportable, and artwork. Those are when you're looking at true generational wealth, like that's how it's been transmitted. Now, obviously, we live in this new and exciting world, and those that are engaged in innovation would say also, Bitcoin and perhaps other digital assets might now form part of that piece, and they might well be right. There's no doubt about that. So investing in property is obviously a very, very positive step if done well. I suppose let's get the bad news out of the way. one of the many mechanisms and levers to contain inflation is interest rates. And you would anticipate interest rates being normalized, so returning to 5-6%. And this may not age well, okay? And if it doesn't age well, I can be quite, I'm happy to take the feedback. But I do not see interest rates normaling to 5 or 6%, certainly in the short term. I would say that would immediately trigger the insolvency of most of the UK. And I'm talking now about normal households with, contributing ably to society. They are not going to sustain interest rate rises of that kind. And also, I don't think the government can, but we'll leave that as an aside.
What do you think, what does short term mean to you?
So, well, certainly in the next 12 months, I think, potentially the Bank of England is going to have to be seen to do something. And I use those words intentionally. They need to signal that they see inflation and that they're going to address it. But I think we're going to see very, very incremental rises. And I think they're going to be spread out over time. Now, I might be wrong, but that's my feeling on it. So that's obviously one of the warning things we need to address. I think the other one, which I'm not going to be popular for raising, and I think it's that risk assessment thing, is how likely is it going to happen? And if it happens, how awful is it going to be? To simplify the risk assessment model, is what historically has happened in high inflationary environments in the property sector is rent control. And you might say to me, Paul, what on earth are you talking about? I would then urge anybody to go back to the manifesto pledges of all of the political parties who put themselves forward at the last election, and you will notice a theme. And that theme, particularly sort of, on the left, and I make no criticism of this, you read those manifestos, you see what they say. Nearly all of them refer to rent controls. And even Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, he has discussed rent controls as well. And you can understand why. You look at the rental, you look at the cost of rents in London, and you think about the voting demographic, and you think that they have children, and those children need to find housing. You can understand why he's going down that path, because he is addressing a need that needs thinking about, doesn't it? We have a terrible undersupply of accommodation in the UK. Is the answer that the planning system needs complete, not fit for purpose? Does it need complete reform? Who knows? All of my architect friends tell me that's the case. They say these people don't care whether we have any more houses or not. It's impossible to get transactions completed. My clients are losing projects because these people aren't moving, and they're not moving because they have no interest in it moving. But yeah, so rent controls. Look at what many of the major parties are talking about. It's in there. Do I think it's going to happen? I do not think it's going to happen in the short term. If it happens anywhere, it will happen in London first, and we can all watch and see what happens. There will be people who are listening to the podcast who think rent controls are a fantastic idea, and they might be right. I think where we've seen rent controls not work so well is when they've been so punitive that those people who are asset owners can no longer sustain the viability of their assets. So they are forced to stop doing maintenance. And then that can lead to a cascade where people are exiting too quickly in an area from a market. There are not enough buyers to pick up the slack. And then the people who've worked hard all of their lives to own an asset, which they live in with their family, are seeing their value depreciating. So, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants that because they're trying to leave a legacy for their families. So rent controls, doomsday, that could be it. Do I think it's going to happen? Absolutely not. But let's keep an eye on London. Let's see how that progresses over the years. As I say, don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. May not happen ever. We'll see.
Okay, so that's kind of you're talking about how the macro there is affecting people and things to keep an eye out for, and things people can do in terms of like reducing their costs, for example, and investing in property. But investing in property that's quite a broad term, right? There's many ways to do that. So what do you see as the trends for investing in property to combat, inflation, or so that people can help themselves on this journey? So the trends this year and then moving into next year then.
Yeah, so I think, well, the trends we've seen this year is that we have seen the creative destruction of COVID. So we've seen good businesses not progress, and that's it. So and they're in a range of different aspects across the property space. So I suppose looking forward, we can pick up some of those themes. So we all know that the serviced accommodation market is now a truly mature market. Practitioners that who've been in the game for decades will tell us it's always been here, Paul, but like it's a truly mature and developed market now. And what lessons can we take from what we've seen? Occupancy is absolutely crucial key. And people who have exited the SA market going into this forthcoming year, the reason they've done that is because actually, do you know what? When I factor in all of the variables, I've actually made more, just having a really good solid single let, sitting back and letting the process take care of itself. So maybe that's a lesson for all of us is, SA works in fantastic locations, or if you've got like a really smart niche, in which case perhaps keep it to yourself, then it can work. What has been an absolute like outperformer, and I think is here to stay, is within serviced accommodation, the holiday let niche. So I know many of us are absolutely chomping to bits to get back on a flight, to go around the world, because travel, for many of us, traveling is our thing. I can tell you a huge proportion of the UK are never getting back onto a flight. They're just done with it. And also the way we live has changed as well. So, I think family units join together to go on holidays in the UK, and that whole staycation market is here to stay. And that's not free from its difficulties. I think what lessons could some of us property investors learn? Probably don't post exactly how much you're charging for a week in your Scottish holiday lodge, because it's going to wind up your friends. But let's leave that as an aside. But the staycation is definitely going to stay. And obviously, when people publish these headline numbers, the problem is there's no context. Like if you're providing, an absolutely grade A service and you've got a million different moving parts, you have to finance that through a high ticket price. But the external observer doesn't know that, and it winds them from the rest of it. So definitely staycations here to stay, big growth area. Where are going to be the challenges there? There has always been a negative sentiment towards second home ownership in certain parts of the UK. For as long as I can remember, that's the case. And I'm not going to go into the specific examples because I don't want to be unfair about those areas, but there are specific places, the pockets, where second home ownership has always been, understandably, a subject of much frustration. Because people's kids can't move into the same village, and it's really upsetting. And I think we can all resonate with that, even if we are second home owners. So staycations are here to stay. And, it's going to be good business, big business, I think, done well. That's fantastic. One of the areas, the sources of frustration is obviously the media narrative around that. So I think we need to brace ourselves for further headline grabbing stories about people not being able to buy homes in locality, not being able to rent in their locality. And these are very real issues. We have to face up to them. We have to take responsibility for them. But you and I, Michelle, have been around long enough to know, well, why are people repurposing their buy-to-lets through to being holiday homes? One, because the regime under which landlords operate in terms of the AST system and the ability to with deep regret, have to make to give notice to tenants who are behaving in a way that isn't consistent with their obligations. That regime is very much stacked against landlords, and that is the direction of travel. That is not going to, the wind is not going to turn, the sails are not going in the opposite direction. So landlords they've been put in a very difficult position where they're, I want to let to these people, but I know that I really now will struggle to evict them in the future, because that's where we're going. And also, of course, the tax changes. We have lost interest, the tax relief on our interest if we have their properties in our own names. And so landlords, particularly those with quite a lot of leverage or who have other income, and the high rate taxpayers, they've had to, on the advice of their accountants, repurpose their portfolios. So holiday lets are here to stay, probably going to get some negative headwinds, but it would be great if the industry could direct those negative headwinds back to the government that created them, and ask them to look at how they're intervening in the property industry, because every intervention they make has a negative consequence, not just for the property people, but for everybody else. What are some of the other big winners? Biggest winner for the last 24 months, logistical space. So I know people in the logistical space who own warehouses. Every day is Christmas for them. Since Brexit, the last mile logistical space market has been absolutely phenomenal. You hear people talk, they've got massive portfolios, and they say that the only part of their portfolio that's never created any arrears is their logistic warehouses. So there you go. So those are a few little predictions for you. I think the classic buy-to-let, here to stay, like they're the bread and butter of a decent portfolio. HMOs, of course, they're here to stay, but I don't want to open too much of a can of worms, but we've got challenges around council tax, we've got challenges around energy. It's not for the faint-hearted. Proceed. Of course, they're great assets, but proceed with knowledge, care, and skill, I would say.
Mm. And how do you see that, with the property market changing and the prices increasing for the values, and are people just purely forced to change their expectations? What they were getting 2 years ago, well, tough, they're just not going to get that now, so you just got to take what you can get. Or do you think there is a trend of people becoming more creative and, looking for other ways to add value? But, obviously there's the airspace as one example of changing trends in planning to allow that. So, I'm just kind of wondering, obviously there's just the standard investor who isn't aware of all these other creative strategies that you can use, is going to be limited naturally to what's there. But for everybody else, where there's purchase lease options on the table, or rent to rent, or planning gain of some sort, are there any other trends there that you can see?
I think that's a very, very personal question, isn't it? In terms of it depends. What's the first step is to know ourselves, and I think it's a very, very personal thing. So I think I was speaking to somebody at a meeting fairly recently, and they're very well capitalized, they've got a full-time job, they've not got a massive amount of headspace. The answer to them is to go out, buy some nice property, don't take on too much of a big refurb, because they can wait for 1 and 2 decades to see a return on their capital, and they have no immediate need for cash flow. So I think if that's you, then you just do it the traditional way. I think if you are more creative, I think you've got time in your hands, you're resilient, and by specifically what I mean by that is you're able to deal with stress and disappointment and all of those things. If you're very resilient, then I think the creative strategies could be an avenue for you, and there's a time and a place in everybody's progression for that. So I think if you're reasonably early in the cycle, you might have more appetite for that. I think maybe if you get later in the cycle, and your appetite to risk maybe diminishes. I suppose I'm speaking personally here. As your appetite for risk diminishes and you have interest in other things, maybe that wouldn't be the route you would pick. But I mean, yeah, I mean, we know that they are strategies which, if done well, definitely work.
Yeah, it's a good point about where you are in your journey and what resources you've got available to you as well. So like moving on to looking forward to the new year then, and at any point in anyone's journey or life, then there's that kind of period of assessment of, am I on track? Where am I going with all of this? People are listening to these podcasts for a reason, because they want to do something different, otherwise they wouldn't be listening to them probably.
Yeah.
So how do you see, I know you've got your own mentorship group as well, and when you coach people, how do you help them through that stage? Because for a lot of people, they see all of the options, and gosh, before it was bad enough you've got so many different options. Now there are more challenges with those options where the buy, refurbish, refinance, really hard to kind of get one of those deals now. So you've got the opportunities like service accommodation, but as we've discussed, they come with their own costs and not just financial as well. And there's lots of elements going on. So how do people decide what their next stage is going to be?
So I'm definitely wanting to, that's a great question. And I think that it's a really necessary step. And I think it's one that's really deeply overlooked. And I think we all need to take stock from time to time. And obviously at the point of recording this, is that kind of, we're in the winter and we're thinking ahead to the new year. But I think also really whenever you're listening to this, what is the truth? The truth is that at any moment in our time, we can completely reinvent ourselves as we wish. And, if you don't believe me, I guarantee there is somebody in your life who one day woke up and you saw them and they had new hair, new clothes, doing new things. And you wondered, what has happened there? And it's great to see, and so we can all do that. We can all really be kind of reinvent ourselves at any point. You don't have to wait for the calendar to be in the right place. So I think you also have to face another, a universal, well, I think it's a universal truth, but, no doubt it's just one of my many beliefs, is that for people listening to this podcast, and I think everybody, it's not a lack of opportunity. I think the challenge is that the world is too abundant with opportunity, but we are so preoccupied with our daily lives and we have so much information coming towards us that it's very difficult to separate out signal from noise. And that's what I would encourage people to do, is to find the signal. I'll perhaps go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. Now, how do you do that? I think what I always do now is I always strip it back to as far back as the original source as I can meaningfully find. So, for example, you've got the late, great Jim Rohn, who, is just one of the greatest people that has ever entered my life through his work. And he very famously has this quote about, we have to design our lives. And if you don't design your life, somebody else will design it for you. And guess what? They don't have much planned for you. And that's definitely true. And I say that without any criticism to my, former employers who I have great love and affection for. But, when you're in a profession like I was in the law, you're on a certain trajectory, and it takes quite a lot of resolution to get off that train. But, what have they got planned for you? They've got many chargeable hours in the office planned for you, because that's how it works. And then I think you can probably, the resource I could offer people in this respect is this book here. So this is like annual reading. So John C. Maxwell, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. John C. Maxwell, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. This is an annual read. So every year you can dip back into it. And then what's the interesting bit is chapter 7. So it's just headed The Law of Design. And particularly if you're lost, you're rudderless, that chapter will change your life, and if you happen to have a family, change your family's life immeasurably. And I'll keep this brief, but basically, it comes in two different stages. It's it comes to 2 stages, and I'll give you the practical bit, very practical bit at the end. He asks you just to sit down and reflect, and to look back over the last, let's say, 24 months, and think about what you've learned. What have you learned? And you just kind of write a page of stuff about you learned. These are his instructions. These are not mine. These are his instructions. And then what he urges you to do is to get your calendar out and look at every single thing you've been through the last 12 months and decide how you feel about it. Do you want to do less of it? Do you want to do more of it? Or do you want to keep it in your life? And the key is you ask your whole family to do this at the same time. And there is a particular window of between Christmas and New Year where you'll get a lot more engagement in the rest of the year, but you can probably do this on a summer holiday as well. And you get people to be really serious about it. There is times in your life you do have to wake up and get serious about this stuff, don't you? And so you have to kind of get them to do it. And everybody wants to know what's in it for them. And so what's in it for them is then we'll meet round the dining room table when everybody's done it, and we will construct the next year in accordance with everybody's wishes. Now, little tip, I would do this in 2 stages, right? So the first stage, you just let people absolutely download everything they want. Do not, I have tried this and failed, do not at that point try to prioritize, because people's hackles get up pretty quickly, because your daughter wants to do one thing and your wife wants to do the opposite, or whatever the context of your life is. So just listen in the first meeting. The second meeting, when people have had a bit of time just to get used to the ideas, because they would have heard stuff they don't want to do as well. That's when you then move on to the practical exercise, which I'll talk about in a second. What I would just forewarn you of is you're going to hear stuff you don't want to know. So, for example, I love my surfing, and I want my daughter to learn my surfing. And this year I had the conversation, Dad, I don't love the surfing as much as you love the surfing. What do you mean you don't love the surfing? But what I learned was that she really loves paddleboarding. So I want to spend good quality daddy-daughter time with her. So I have to step into her world. Her world is she wants to paddleboard. She doesn't like the surfing as much because it's pretty intense. So problem solved, all good. How we do this in practice, though, you may need an aid. So you might need to go onto Amazon and to get a year planner. Now you can get a little baby year planner. So I appreciate in the podcast you're not going to see this, but I've got a little baby year planner here. But also you need a big beast as well. You need like the biggest one that you can foreseeably fit into your office, your house, or your kitchen, whatever it is. And then if you've got kids, put the school holidays in first. If you've not got kids, put the school holidays in first, because that way you never go on holiday surrounded by kids if that's not your thing, which it would be fair enough. And obviously holidays are cheaper. Put everybody's birthdays in, and then you put in like the must-haves. So as you know, I'm a kind of failed musician, so I put in Glastonbury, I put the festivals in first, and then you put in what's important to you. So I have certain events I do with my friends, which are put in first, and then you build it out from there. But you don't start with a blank piece of paper, because you're starting with the output of the exercise of what people really want, and then you build it out from there. That's a bit of direction. Does that help, Michelle? Have I explained that is that reasonably clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's like that idea of the mayonnaise jar, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah.
What's important, focusing on those things first. And I think, what's really important is once you've done an exercise like that, then it helps so much to provide clarity on the other areas of your life, like, for example, the property investing. So, if you've decided that actually having the free time and the less stress is more important than the high cash flow, well, then that's going to influence, what strategies you're looking at for the new year. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that people I speak to, I come across, is that they are just so overwhelmed by all these things that they could do. And part of the problem is they just don't know what they want.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, helping with that is a good opportunity with the festive season coming up, for sure.
But I do think you do it at any point as well. Like, I think it's good to do just whenever. And as part of to put it in the context of property, you can then drill down into, well, what is it you need next? So if you need to replace your job, you will approach it you'll nail down on cash flow. If at this point, listen to the podcast, you say, well, actually, to be honest, my cash flow is pretty good. Well, what is it that's left in your life? So let's say, for example, you wanted to build your own dream home. well, then you maybe need to do a strategy that will create a big lump of capital at the end of the year that you can put into your dream home. Or maybe it's, I've done all of that, Paul, I've got, that's not on my list. It's the, well, what is there a legacy project that you might want to do? Is there a project where, you do the project and all the proceeds go to somebody else? Or, are you planting, there's lovely expressions in there, you're planting seeds of trees that you'll never sit under. So whatever stage you're at, there's the opportunity to reflect and then drill down, even if it's just for a year, into actually what you need to do. Yeah,
it's just making sure that you're on track at each point, because like I say, life changes, things change in the property market that you're not in control of as well. So it's I think more opportunities you can take throughout the year to actually have that reflection time.
Definitely. I think if you need I sometimes hesitate to mention this, but if you need the punchy version, there are things you can do to focus your mind, and not everybody will need this. So if you're reasonably self-motivated, you won't need this. But if you you're one of these people who are slightly struggling to get re-engaged and re-motivated with everything that you're doing, there are some you can look at things, and the way you can look at it is, if you're blessed still to have one or more parents who are still alive, write their age down on a piece of paper and then plan forward from there. If you're blessed to have a child, write their age down and then plan forward from there. We all know, we've all lost people over the years, but I often find that that's a motivating factor as well. Michelle and I lost a mutual friend not so many years ago, and there's nothing more that focuses the mind than that. And I'm sorry to bring that up, but if you're struggling for motivation, sometimes you do need a metaphorical punch in the face to kind of bring you into reality. And if that's helped, hopefully it has, because we haven't got many more rotations of the sun. It is time to really get down to what you want. And by that, I don't mean let's do more work. I mean, let's be more fulfilled, purpose, and connected.
Yeah, let's just remember what we're doing it all for. Yeah, and as I said before, it's all about bringing that the reality home and making it real, just so that we're not caught up in the day-to-day. So well, that is probably a good place to wrap things up. But before we go, tell us about what you're up to next, and how you support people with, I know you've got your Discovery Day coming up soon in January, so what's that all about?
So every January I host the same event. It's in January, usually the first week of January. So if you happen to be listening to this ahead of the next one, the date is the 7th of January 2022, but I host them every, so if you're listening to this in 2030, they'll still be going on. And it's a not-for-profit event. So in this particular instance, it's all of the proceeds are going to a charity called Flourishing Families, which is all about supporting the family, which I know we've all had our own experiences of families, and they're unique creatures, aren't they? But, families are so crucial to everything that happens around us. So they're getting all of the proceeds. And basically we lock in for about 2 to 3 hours, and we really get down. We do a series of exercises, basically back to back, and we get really clear about what the next 12 months looks like. And there's no great pitch, there's no running to the back of the room, there's none of that. I do share as I go along what my inner circle group have been doing, and the challenges and successes they've had, but really anybody can attend. It works really well for property people. I would say 80% of people come are like property people, but equally anybody who's got an interest in investing in themselves and assets, and particularly, I suppose, if people are seeking out. So my highest value is freedom. Freedom, family, and security, all underlined by wealth. I think if freedom is a relevant factor for you, you will get so much out of it. I'll ping a link over to Michelle. So they're an event. Where else can you find me? Obviously, you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So it's Paul Lanfear, Lanfear. The branding's all blue, and you'll easily find me, and you'll find links to all my stuff in all of that. I also happen to host a breakfast meeting, and that's really good, really light touch, small group of property and other investors, and we meet every month. You're welcome just to drop into that whenever you like, and come and meet the crowd and have a great, talk about a problem or challenge or opportunity in the property space. So that's kind of me, and we'll make sure some of that goes into the show notes as well.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll put those links in there for people and encourage people to go along and check that out, because it's just, especially at that particular time of year, if you're looking to be surrounded by like-minded people, it's an opportunity to set yourself up in the year for just getting clear on what it is you are focusing on for the rest of the 12 months. So do check that out, and we look forward to seeing what you're up to in 2022 and see what unfolds for us all.
Exactly. We can see how right or wrong I was. We can gaze into our crystal balls again, can't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's fantastic to have you on, Paul, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Take care. And for any of our listeners who are not yet a subscriber to the magazine, please click the link in the show notes for your free first trial. See you later, guys. Take care.